Before the story begins, I'd like to ask you to subscribe and like. This will help the channel grow. The Last Winter Shift, Winter Detective Story. The city of Greyhaven never truly slept in winter. It slowed. It narrowed. It held its breath. At 3:12 a.m. Detective Jonah Mercer stood outside Substation 12, watching frost creep along the steel fence like a living thing. Snow fell lightly, the kind that didn't announce itself, just appeared, softening edges, muting sound, making everything feel unfinished. Inside the substation, the night shift had stopped responding. Substation 12 controlled power flow to the northern districts, hospitals, transit tunnels, emergency shelters. Losing contact during a winter night wasn't just a technical issue. It was a threat. Jonah showed his badge to a shaking security guard and stepped inside. The first thing he noticed was the silence. No hum of transformers. No rhythmic vibration underfoot. Just the faint whistle of wind slipping through vents. Emergency lights cast long yellow shadows across concrete walls, frozen panels, warning signs half buried in frost. 3 workers were scheduled for the night shift. Only 2 were found. One lay slumped over a console, eyes open, skin gray-blue with cold. No blood. No visible injuries. A coffee cup sat untouched beside his hand, steam long gone. The second was seated against the wall, knees drawn up, fingers locked around a radio that had never transmitted its final call. Hypothermia, the medic said quietly. But Jonah didn't believe it. They were inside. Power should have kept the temperature stable. Someone had shut the system down deliberately. The third worker, Aaron Pike, was missing. Jonah examined the control board. Switches were thrown in the correct order, not panicked, not random. Someone knowledgeable had powered the substation down step by step, ensuring no alarms triggered. A planned blackout. On the floor beneath the main console, half hidden under drifting snow blown in through a vent, Jonah found something strange. A laminated access card. Not from the power company. From the city's Winter Emergency Authority. Someone had come here with permission. And someone hadn't left. By morning, the blackout had spread. Entire blocks in the North District lost power. Emergency generators kicked in late. One shelter evacuated. A dialysis ward transferred patients through snow-choked streets. Official statements blamed unexpected equipment failure. Jonah listened to the press briefing from his car, heater struggling against the cold. It was all wrong. At headquarters, he spread maps across the table, power grids, weather patterns, emergency response times. A technician helped him reconstruct the shutdown sequence. Whoever did it knew exactly how long each district could survive without power before emergency protocols forced intervention. They weren't trying to cause chaos. They were testing limits. Aaron Pike's personnel file raised more questions. 27 years old. Former military engineer. Recently reassigned from maintenance to night operations. A quiet demotion after he filed a report questioning winter preparedness budgets. Jonah visited Pike's apartment that afternoon. The door wasn't forced. Inside, the heat was still on, unusual during rolling outages. On the kitchen table lay blueprints, printed emails, and a handwritten note. They know winter hides everything. In the bedroom, Jonah found a duffel bag packed for cold weather. Thermal gear. Rations. Hand warmers. A burner phone taped under the bed frame. Pike hadn't been taken by surprise. He had planned to disappear. But one detail stopped Jonah cold. The burner phone still had battery. Its last unsent message read, asterisk, "If I don't make it out, shut them down before the storm." Star. Outside, snow began to fall harder, thicker, like the city itself was bracing. Someone was using winter infrastructure as leverage. And the next night shift was already starting. By the second night, The city had learned to be afraid of the dark. Snow fell heavier now, thick enough to blur streetlights into pale halos. Jonah Mercer drove north, past neighborhoods where windows glowed unevenly, some bright, some blacked out entirely. Power rationing had begun unofficially. People shared extension cords. Fires burned in barrels. The cold pressed inward, patient and cruel. The Winter Emergency Authority denied everything. Officially, Substation 12 was an isolated incident. Unofficially, Jonah noticed patrol patterns tightening around 3 other substations, all feeding critical winter infrastructure. Someone else had noticed the same vulnerabilities he had. Someone like Aaron Pike. Jonah followed Pike's trail beyond the city limits, where snowplows turned back and the road surrendered to ice. His phone lost signal. The GPS blinked uselessly. This was where the city stopped pretending it could control winter. An abandoned service hub sat at the end of the road, once used for maintaining heating tunnels beneath Greyhaven decades ago. Officially decommissioned. Unofficially warm. Steam rose faintly from vents buried under snow. Inside, Jonah found signs of recent life. A generator running low. Empty ration wrappers. A map pinned to the wall with red markings, substations, shelters, emergency clinics. All connected by one thing: delayed response times during storms. This wasn't sabotage for profit. It was exposure. A voice echoed from deeper inside the hub. "You shouldn't be here alone, Detective." Aaron Pike stepped into the light. He looked exhausted. Bearded. Eyes sharp with the kind of fear that comes from knowing you're right but powerless. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't run. "They let them die," Pike said before Jonah could speak. "Every winter. Quietly. Budget cuts. Deferred maintenance. Acceptable losses." Jonah lowered his gun slowly. "You shut down Substation 12, Jonah said. "I shut it down safely," Pike replied. "They shut it back on too late." Pike explained everything. The Winter Emergency Authority had been falsifying resilience data for years, overstating capacity, understating risk. When Pike flagged the numbers, he was silenced. When he pushed harder, he was scheduled for night shifts. When he refused to drop it, he was marked. The blackout wasn't meant to kill anyone. It was meant to force the truth into the open. "But someone else wanted bodies," Jonah said. Pike's face tightened. "I know." Outside, engines approached. More than one. The raid came fast. Black SUVs slid into place like predators on ice. Tactical units poured out. Not city police, not federal. Private security. Clean uniforms. No insignia. The Winter Emergency Authority didn't call them guards. They called them consultants. Jonah and Pike barely escaped through a service tunnel as gunfire cracked against concrete. The tunnel sloped downward, heat fading with every step. Water dripped and froze mid-fall. The city above them hummed, unaware. They surfaced blocks away, breath burning, hands numb. Pike knew where this ended. "There's a board meeting tomorrow," he said. "Emergency session. They'll approve controlled shutdowns during the storm to optimize resource allocation." Translation: sacrifice zones. Jonah contacted Internal Affairs. Silence. He contacted the mayor's office. Voicemail. The storm forecast worsened hourly. Snowfall records were already breaking. This wasn't corruption. It was calculation. Jonah reviewed the data Pike had collected. Heat maps. Mortality curves. Budget spreadsheets where lives became decimals. Entire neighborhoods written off because they were statistically resilient. Winter wasn't the killer. Policy was. They needed proof that couldn't be buried. They needed the meeting. As night fell again, Greyhaven braced for the worst storm in 20 years. Plows staged. Shelters filled. Power strained. And somewhere downtown, executives prepared to decide who would be warm and who would freeze. The storm reached Greyhaven just after dusk, not with violence, but with certainty. Snow didn't fall. It settled, layer after layer, heavy enough to bend street signs and swallow curbs whole. Wind threaded through alleys and glass corridors alike, finding every weakness the city had pretended wasn't there. Sirens wailed briefly, then stopped. Not broken. Disabled. Jonah Mercer stood on the roof of the municipal annex across from City Hall, collar crusted with ice, watching the building where the Winter Emergency Authority convened its final session. Light spilled from the upper floors, warm, insulated, indifferent. Below him, the city fractured. Power flickered in districts already marked red on Pike's maps. First the industrial quarter, then the low-rise housing blocks near the river. Not blackouts, throttles. Just enough heat to keep pipes alive. Not enough to keep people safe. Jonah's phone vibrated. Pike, they're voting now. Jonah scanned the street. Snowplows stood idle, engines cold. Police cruisers blocked intersections, not to help, but to contain. Keep people where the math said they belonged. He remembered the spreadsheet, columns labeled projected loss and thermal viability. He remembered how clean it looked. Jonah moved. Inside City Hall, the air was dry and warm. Too warm. The kind of heat meant to erase the outside world. Executives sat around a polished table, coffee steaming, coats neatly folded. Screens displayed live storm data and controlled outage charts. The chairwoman spoke calmly. Phase 3 implementation begins at 2100 hours. Emergency response will prioritize zones A and B. A man beside her hesitated. And zone C through. Acceptable attrition, she said. The doors burst open. Jonah didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He walked forward and placed Pike's data drive on the table like a piece of evidence already decided. You've been lying about capacity for 6 years, Jonah said. You rerouted maintenance funds. You falsified winter resilience reports. You let infrastructure rot because coal doesn't testify. Security moved. Then stopped. Because the screens changed. Pike had done it. Live feeds flooded every monitor. Internal emails, archive reports, meeting recordings. Voices filled the room. Their voices, talking about winter deaths as mitigation. About statistical mercy. Outside, the feeds went public. Phones lit up across Greyhaven. And the city learned who had chosen to let it freeze. Morning came slowly, as if unsure it was welcome. Snow still fell, lighter now, almost gentle. The storm had sped itself. What remained was damage and truth. Generators roared to life in districts long ignored. Emergency crews moved without waiting for permission. Volunteers filled shelters that had been empty for years. Heat returned unevenly, but it returned. The Winter Emergency Authority no longer existed. Arrests were made quietly. No resistance. The evidence was too complete. Too public. Executives were escorted past cameras they had once controlled. None of them spoke. Aaron Pike was cleared within hours. He stood beside Jonah on the bridge overlooking the river, ice breaking apart below them, carried downstream piece by piece. They'll call it reform, Pike said. They always do. Jonah watched the current. They'll call it survival, he replied. At the memorial site near Substation 12, candles burned despite the cold. Names were read aloud, not just of those lost this winter, but of those forgotten in winters past. Families stood together, breath fogging, hands clasped. Greyhaven didn't celebrate that new year. It remembered. Weeks later, Jonah returned to his office. The heater rattled. The window leaked cold. But the city outside felt different, awake in a way it hadn't been before. Winter would come again. It always did. But it would never again be allowed to hide decisions made in warm rooms by people who never planned to feel the cold. Snow began to fall outside the window. This time, it didn't feel like silence.